Good afternoon and welcome back to the seventh episode of the Union Podcast. I'm Curtis Valentine. I'm here with my sister, Carrie Rodriguez, and it's summertime, but we don't take any time off, Carrie, for the work that we do to ensure that parents and teachers and students get the information they need about education.
That's right. And there's a lot to talk about. Just because it is August does not mean we stop. We're all gas, no brakes over here because folks are coming back home from DC. You're going to start to see members of Congress in your grocery store getting coffee, bumping into them at the farmer's market and at the bodega. So make sure that you are ready with what you need to be talking to them about. That's what this whole podcast is about. You're going to be able to go in, have some good questions with the folks as they come home from DC, and you should do it this year.
Yeah, I think we should call our podcast No Recess because, right now Congress is in recess. There are things happening both in Washington, but around the country that people think are incredibly important. We know they're important. We want to keep you informed with the latest news, latest policy, politics, research, polling, and ways to advocate for your children and your community. Understanding it's so important that you're informed. Funny enough, back in places like Atlanta, they're back in school already. And so I got buddies down that just came from Atlanta yesterday. School's back in session in all parts of this country. And so as people are going back to school, teachers are going back into the classroom, they're getting ready for a new school year. They're going to get a rude awakening, Carrie, about what's happening with local money coming out of the federal government. Tell us what's happening and what people can expect as they're going back to school as early as today.
Well, I got to tell you, Curtis, we're already hearing the conversation about school supply lists. And this is turning out to be quite a fight. I mean, every year, if you work with parents and families and educators, tis the season for the acrimony and the fighting back and forth. Why do I have to provide so many pencils and erasers and whiteboard markers and paper and all this stuff for the classroom? And teachers saying, well, we don't get paid enough and we need these supplies. It's really such an interesting point of tension that happens every single year. And the past several years, I'll tell you, as being a representative of American families, I have done so many interviews with the media talking about how the economy is hitting families hard. And every year it gets tougher and tougher and tougher. I got to tell you something, Curtis. Even now, I'm well prepared for this, but I have never seen it start so early and people be so shook by what they are seeing at Walmart, what they're seeing at Target, what they're seeing at the grocery store. There is real fear out there in terms of how we are going to be able to deal with the prices we're seeing in stores while being able to get our kids prepared for back to school. Now, I will tell you, this is more than just anecdote, although we are seeing this not only in all of the meetings that we're hosting across the country, all over social media. I mean, TikTok, it's a battle. It is a battle going back between teachers and families arguing about, why do I have to do this? We pay taxes. This should be supplied by the district. But it's quite a conversation. But just yesterday, Echelon Insights, which is our pollster for the National Parents Union, Kristen Solis Anderson is our pollster. She released a brand new survey of Americans talking about just kind of taking the temperature of where the country is right now. Now, I will give you the caveat before I release the results that these are numbers from early June. So we're not even seeing the full breadth of the scandal right now around the Epstein files, which is really just preoccupying so many people and so much conversation. But this is a good indicator of where the country is. And this was from about mid-June. So number one with a bullet. Top concern, biggest issue facing the country today, the cost of living. 38% of Americans saying that, listen, we are in critical condition, absolute critical condition. This immigration, the state of democracy, political corruption, and jobs in the economy really, kind of filling out the rest of the top five there. But education, only 1% of Americans would say that is their top concern when it comes to the biggest issues facing the country today. So, Curtis, we've got some work to do in terms of elevating the issue that we know is so important, that is critical to actually deal with a lot of the economic issues that are so concerning to Americans, and making sure that we are prioritizing something that is so important for our future, for our communities, and making sure our kids are well prepared, because education just not in that mix right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why we do the work. I mean, we talked about this last week when we talked about how the big beautiful bill, Medicare cuts, were really not top of mind to folks. Not that they weren't interested in it. If they knew about it, it would be important, but they were so busy doing a lot of other things. The algorithms weren't working in our favor. And when it came down to understanding what was happening at the federal government, we're talking in the teens, the percentage of folks who actually knew what was happening. And again, this is why this particular podcast for parents, for educators, for students is incredibly important. Again, the National Parents Union you run, you guys have really been so impactful in how you empower parents to stay active during the summer months, so that when folks come back from session, they know exactly what their constituents want and how they should be voting. What are some of the ways that parents can stay involved during the summer months and during recess, particularly with your organization, to ensure that they get the information they need, but that their elected officials are responding to the demands of their voters?
So number one, I want to put it out on behalf of my constituency, and I'm going to extend the olive branch to yours as well, Curtis. Parents and teachers, we got to come together. I mean, right now parents are tapped out. Cost of living is through the roof. School supply lists are longer than ever. Let's not fight. We got to come together to hold our elected officials accountable, because it's not us. And it's not teachers, it's both of us. We are in hot water right now, and we've got to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to get in front of members of Congress, your state legislators, your governors, and get in the mix. So 'tis the season. August is a great time for a political fundraiser. And we know a lot of these folks are going to be going back home to their districts and saying, hey, you want to keep me in office? Hand over that $25, that $50, that $500 gift. This is your opportunity. If you get invited to one of those, before you decide to support somebody, ask the tough questions. What are you doing to make sure that the funding is flowing down to our classrooms, that we are not cutting up education funding and leaving our kids to the wolves? Make sure that you take advantage of that FaceTime that you may have with an elected official in your neighborhood asking you for your support. Make sure they earn it by asking those questions. If you are not invited to those fundraisers and you're saying, Carrie, I don't know politicians like that, I'm not going to a barbecue or a fundraiser, that's okay. You can write a letter to the editor, you can write an op-ed, and you can make sure your voice is heard right now. Using social media is going to be really important. Even if you're just saying, hey, anybody else feeling the pinch right now and a little bit worried about whether or not we're going to have after school programming next year, because it seems like all of the funding coming from the state and the feds are drying up and folks are making tough choices. What do you think? Making sure that those questions are continuing to be part of the conversation is important. And you're going to have to push in. Again, I mentioned the Epstein files. We got to get real about this, Curtis, okay? There is a lot of static. There is a lot of drama. There is just a lot swirling around the political universe right now. And frankly, when you do show up at those political fundraisers, or you go to a town hall or a coffee hour where your elected official is going to be there, there's going to be other folks out there who are mad as hell. A lot of folks with some bees in their bonnets around this Epstein stuff, and they want answers. So know and be ready for the fact that there's a lot of people who have a lot of deep concerns about a whole host of issues, and you've got to make sure that you're aggressive to get us in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is why it's important that parents, educators, students are in the spaces that people are talking about education and are talking to elected officials. Because if you're not there, as Carrie mentioned, they're going to be talking about things that may not directly impact you and your family, but are important to them. It is competition, and in some cases, it's warfare trying to get in front of elected officials and ensuring that there are consequences for not supporting us. At the same time, we want to understand sometimes the urgent can get in front and get placement in front of the important. We talk about this all the time, that We are here to talk about research, about policy, about advocacy that impacts learners, disadvantaged learners, Black and brown learners, learners around the country who are disadvantaged. And just this week, the Department of Education sent out what we call a Dear Colleague letter, right? It's this, letters to folks around the country talking about different regulations through the federal government. And this is particular to the Department of Education. Now, this letter does not have the force of law and does not bind the public or create any legal standards, but it does advise folks, particularly on how the department interprets law and is going to follow through on grant funding. So in particular, this conversation around artificial intelligence, and we talk about this periodically because it's at the forefront of what's happening in education, in jobs, and how our students get into higher education, college and career, and where we move forward. And so this week, the department issued guidance on schools using a formula and discretionary grant fundings to improve academic outcomes using artificial intelligence. Through this letter, the Department of Education really encouraged grantees to explore how they use AI to enhance teaching and learning without replacing the role of educators. And so this is a friction we're going to be having now in the future, moving forward. How does AI impact teacher training, the displacement of teachers? How are teachers using AI in the classroom? How is it supporting learners? How do they use it to draw curriculum, to grade, to assess, to support, to create really personalized learning? This is important. So here are the three areas particularly that this letter really highlighted. One, that artificial intelligence should be based on high quality instructional material. What does that mean? That includes AI-powered instructional tools that adapt to learner needs in real time, that expand access to high-quality personalized learning materials across all subjects, all grade levels, and learning environments. And lastly, how are we making sure that those instructional materials train educators, providers, and families to use AI effectively and responsibly? This is incredibly important because in many ways, it's the Wild West out there, ladies and gentlemen. And we want to make sure that what we have in front of our educators and our students is quality. What else? How do we use AI to enhance high-impact tutoring? That includes tutoring systems that provide academic support with real-time assessments. Again, if we're using these effectively, we should know where students are on different levels and how you can personalize your responses to them and your intervention. Then we have to have hybrid models where AI-based learning platforms can complement human tutors. Again, we look at some of the research. Having an AI tool can be effective, but you also have to have that human touch as well. And lastly, how are you using diagnostic and scheduling tools that use AI to match learners with tutoring services they need? Again, having the right tutor, having the wrong tutor in front of a student doesn't help. And last but not least, how are we using AI for college and career pathway exploration, advising, and navigation? I mentioned last week I was in front of some students here in Maryland who are in the sort of vocational training, not only cultural training, but workforce development and apprenticeship programs. And one of the things they said was, we really need that mentor who's going to advise us on how to make the right decisions. And so last but not least, this AI conversation around platforms that leverage AI to help students identify career interests, explore pathways, and make informed choices. Again, we don't want to just assume that you see a student and you can tell right off the bat what they should be doing. You got to sit down, be very thoughtful about what they're doing, where their career goals are, and where their gifts are. And then there's virtual advising systems that guide students through course planning, financial aid, and transitions into post-secondary education. Again, we don't want students making bad decisions, both for themselves academically or financially. And lastly, how are we using predictive models, AI predictive models that support educators to identify students in need of additional advising and student support. A lot there, Carrie. Again, how are you?
Stuff.
I mean, it's out there. We got to be involved. We got to know what's going on.
Yeah, and I think some of the key takeaways from my perspective is really understanding that this is not something to be afraid of. This is something that can actually help teachers, help educators, but we're not looking to replace them. What we'd like to do is take away some of the bureaucracy, some of the paperwork, that like those pieces that make the actual art and science of teaching, just so burdensome. So it will free teachers up to do the things that we know are so important, and frankly, that parents and families really want, which is about that relationship building, those soft skills, things that you will never be able to replace with AI. So it can be something that complements, it can be something that helps. It's not something to be afraid of. And frankly, it's going to free up a lot of time for teachers to actually do the important work that we want. The other thing that I think is really important is the power of AI to make data actionable. And that's another thing that we really, really want to see as parents and families. It surprises folks sometimes when we say, hey, actually, parents and families really like assessment and numbers and data and all of this. But the problem is we don't like getting it late. And frankly, we don't know what to do with it once we get it. If there's a way utilizing AI and so many of these tools so that we can make data more actionable, so that we can make better decisions for our kids in terms of pathway exploration, advising kids in terms of where their aptitudes might be, and also where some deficits might be. But these are powerful tools that we can be using to make sure that we're choosing the right paths and we're not gatekeeping certain populations of kids that should have access to things like AP, that if we saw their data, instead of just kind of having this more general, subjective view about who's an AP kid and not, and actually use data to help us to make those decisions using AI and programs like this to make a more comprehensive assessment, more kids are going to get access. At least that's the hope.
And let me tell you this, particularly as it relates to Black and brown learners who often are not represented in a lot of these AI platforms and how they're gathering information. And a lot of bias is involved in a lot of these things that oftentimes can do more harm than good. And so we don't want to sort of sugarcoat this. And this is not just Pollyanna, AI is going to be the answer to everything. But when you don't have particularly Black and brown students represented, and educators particularly who are looking at how to use these tools, they've seen, and folks particularly in the Real Men Teach world have got back to me and have tried to ask us and identify different tools and organizations that are going in and doing a really good. I want to shout out my good brother Jason Green with Your Way, who's working with school districts, particularly on how to effectively use AI in the classroom, support teachers in professional development, but also ensure that you have learners getting what they need and that it's really not biased. And so I'm so glad that parents are involved. I'm looking forward to hearing more from the National Parents Union on what parents are saying they want to see, but also how are parents getting involved in schools to understand exactly how their students are using AI. So it's not a reporting back to parents, but it's more of a conversation.
Yeah, and that's really important. We've been doing a lot of work, and particularly with the New York City public schools around AI and AI literacy for parents. And what's been interesting is kind of changing the mindset around districts like New York City public schools around, is this something we just do to kids, or is this something we do with families with their consent so that they actually understand when AI is being utilized in the classroom, what their kids are being exposed to, and when they're being exposed to it. And, that's been quite a journey because, I think districts are also trying to figure out, when do we get consent from parents? What do parents know about AI? So what we've been doing is partnering and being part of the leadership of the EdSafe AI Coalition, as well as Teach AI, that beautiful coalition that's run by code.org, to make sure that the voices of parents and families are heard and considered. And to that end, Curtis, what you were just saying about making sure there is diversity and equity and inclusion available in AI.
Yes.
You are pushing in. Yes, I said it. I said it.
Yeah. We don't shy from it.
Important because you know what? Kids who have access to AI, who are trying, especially around generative AI, that are asking ChatGPT, like, show me a picture of a teacher, show me a picture of a businessman, and you're seeing a white woman and a white man is not really inclusive of what I don't know, every businessman or every teacher looks like, and calling those things out and recognizing that these are the things that we're exposing to kids. This is how the cake is being baked as early on as kindergarten, and how we have to be very thoughtful as we create these tools that they are inclusive of the very diverse population that we are in the United States and frankly across the world is critically important. And the time to make that known is now.
Carrie, it's funny when I do conferences, I talk about representation and what the data shows around what happens when you have an educator who looks like you and shares your background and what it means for student development. This is sort of a general conversation, and I start off with the AI point that you just mentioned, asking ChatGPT to tell you, to give me a picture of a teacher. But I take it a step further. ChatGPT, show me a picture of a good teacher, an effective teacher, and so now we're getting into levels of performance that oftentimes, again, based off of what ChatGPT believes, will show images that may not be representative of the person who's asking for it. And this is incredibly important because this is where students who want to become teachers, they don't see themselves in these images. They're less likely to want to become the things that we're seeing. And even some research that I'm seeing, we're tracking even now, particularly as it relates to teachers in special education. Those educators that are working specifically with the students who have the most needs. And that we're seeing in recent research that the special education teacher demographics are not keeping up pace with changes in the student population. And so in 2012, about 80% of US public school teachers were white, including 80% of special education teachers, while less than 20% were teachers of color. By contrast, the same year, students of color constituted 47% of those diagnosed with disabilities. And so for the teacher education workforce to become representative of the student population, U.S. schools need to triple the number of special education teachers of color. And so those of you who are listening in and thinking about where the needs are and how we're supporting particular students who have special needs, and those who are even more impacted after COVID, who came in, struggling, schools struggled to respond to their needs, schools struggled to find teachers to educate those students the way they need to be. We're actually regressing and getting worse. And so we want to make sure that educators reflect their students, but especially in cases where they need the most support. And so if you're thinking about getting involved, please reach out to me and others who are saying, Curtis, I think I have some folks who are interested in special education as a profession, and we want to get them connected because this is where the rubber meets the road, and our students need people who really, really want to teach them, who see the highest potential, who have high expectations, but also understand that everyone comes at different levels, but understand their background and can make sure those students get to where they need to get to.
And we've got to do the work in our own communities as well. I'm gonna call out, so some of the experience that I've had in my community. I don't know if it's the same for your community, Curtis, but there are some misconceptions when it comes to special education, period, being a profession, but specifically special education, and whether or not, kids who have been identified for special ed, if they just need to behave or if they need more discipline and a lot of that, and whether or not, we can disrupt, some of that cycle of that mindset within our own communities by making sure we do the work of working with children and understanding where they're coming from so that we can overcome a lot of the misconceptions that exist in communities like mine around who these kids are, what autism is, what ADHD is, so that we can actually make sure that we're reaching these kids directly. I wanted to say one other thing, Curtis, that I think is really important. And I have spent so much time over the past, 2 decades standing side by side with teachers, talking about the fact that kids like mine need to see themselves reflected in classroom leadership. But one of the things that I have also come to find is that while it is so important for Black and brown kids to see teachers of color, it is also so important for white kids to see teachers of color at the head of the classroom. Because if the first time you are exposed to Black and brown excellence is when you get that first college professor, a lot of the time your mindset, that cake is already baked. And so for me, I really feel very strongly if we're going to disrupt, some of the racism, the prejudice, the bias that exists in our society, we can do that by making sure that when you're in kindergarten, first grade, and you're a little white boy or a little white girl, you can see that reflected in your teacher and understand that, before, all of those misconceptions and those stereotypes are baked into your head, differently because you've seen differently. And I think that can also be transformational for our kids across this country.
Well, I agree. Some of you all know I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I will tell you the overwhelming majority of my students do not look like me, but they often explain that, Mr. Ballantyne, you're the first African-American male professor I've had at University of Maryland, a pretty diverse, large university in the state of Maryland.
Isn't that wild? That's crazy.
It is wild, but they understand my course is going to expose them to data, to research, to authors that they're not typically going to hear from. And then when they graduate from the University of Maryland, wherever they're going to school, they can walk in and say, I'm well-rounded. Yes, I had a professor of this race and that one who had this background and this lived experience, but I don't have any blind spots, any deficits that when I go in to teach or go into school or go into policy conversations at the state, federal, local level, I'm fully informed and can respond, and can retort when people have debates about how to improve education. It's incredibly important, Carrie, that we have our students prepared for the future. We're going to wrap up soon, Carrie. Any final words before we wrap up? Give folks back their lunch break on an incredible Friday during congressional recess, but not the union podcast recess, because we're here every Friday.
Again, I want to leave folks with the reminder, August is all gas, no brakes. Show up, do something. I know it's hot outside. It's beautiful. Folks are on vacation. It only takes a few minutes to take an action to make sure that we are holding Congress accountable, governors accountable for what could be a very tricky back to school season. And trust me, you don't want to come back from vacation at the end of August and say, oh my gosh, the devil has been afoot this whole month and I have been out to lunch. Go out to lunch, refill your cup for sure. But you got to keep your eye on the ball, unfortunately, this summer, because there's a lot happening. It's happening quick. Show up at that town hall. Make sure that you're engaging on social media. Make a little TikTok. Maybe you've never made a TikTok before. It's really easy. If I can do it and Curtis can do it, you could do it too. Let your voice be heard. And frankly, it's a great and easy entry point. It only takes a few minutes. You could do it today.
Well, here's the first thing. They're watching us right now, Carrie. So they've taken the first step. Here's another step. Share this episode on your social media. Let your folks know. Drop it in your parent groups. Drop it in the text messages. Let them know that you are a viewer of the Union Podcast with Curtis Ballantyne, Carrie Rodriguez every Friday. Keep them informed. Watch past episodes so that they understand what's happening in education. Again, we thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We'll see you next Friday, same place, same time. Have a great weekend. See you soon, Carrie.